Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that Moscow will consider measures to counter threats posed by U.S. missile systems in Europe.
Now that these anti-missile elements have been installed, we will be forced to consider putting an end to the threats emerging in relation to Russia's security.
Putin said Russia will adjust defense spending plans to neutralize threats from the U.S. missile systems. He said Washington's move threatens global security and is a step towards a new arms race. However, Putin said Russia will not get engaged in a new arms race, but will continue modernizing its armed forces. Putin also said the U.S. missile system is a clear violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The United States switched on an $800 million missile system in Romania on Thursday, which will be part of a larger missile system in Europe. Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined by Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, who is a publisher and editor of Politics First, and he's joining us live now via Skype from London. Thanks very much for joining us. How do you feel about this missile system set up in Romania?
Well, it's quite simply a grave threat to peace, not just in Europe, but in the wider world. President Putin was correct when he said that the going live of the American missile defense shield this week is a violation of the INF Treaty. The INF Treaty, which was signed in 1987 between the Soviet Union and the United States, prohibited the stationing of long-distance ballistic and cruise missiles. And of course, the American defense shield in Europe, which is partly in Romania and partly in Poland, comprises missiles which are of a long-distance nature. So the INF Treaty has been violated by the Americans. And secondly, the American missile defense shield is without a doubt aimed at the Russian strategic nuclear deterrent. When the plans for this shield were announced about 10 years ago, the Americans and their allies in Europe argued that the missile defense shield was aimed at protecting Europe from Iran and North Korea. Now, we knew at that time that Russia was the actual target, but the Russian government said to the Americans, why don't we work together on a joint missile defense shield for Europe? Of course, the Americans weren't interested in that. Now, fast forward to 2016, the West has lifted sanctions on Iran, and there's an agreement between the West and Iran. And so the argument 10 years ago from the Americans and the Europeans that this missile defense shield is partly aimed at Iran has now been exposed again to have been a lie, because now that there's an agreement between Iran and America, let's hold the Americans to that. They argued the missile defense shield was aimed at protecting Europe from Iran. There's an agreement now, so therefore there's no need for an American missile defense shield. Of course, we all know that Russia has been the target from day one.
So then, obviously, then the question becomes, how will Russia counter the setting up of these U.S. missile systems throughout Europe?
Well, throughout its history, Russia has always met any threat posed to its security, and the American missile defense shield will be no exception. Of course, there's been talk that the Russians may move Iskander ballistic missiles to the Kaliningrad enclave. There's also the possibility that the Russians might move the same missiles, the Iskander, to the Crimea, because part of the American missile defense shield is, of course, based in Romania. Romania is not that far from the Crimea. And there's many other options available to Russia. But let's be sure about one thing, that the American missile defense shield is a threat to Russia. Therefore, it's a threat to the peace, to European peace and to global peace. And the American missile defense shield will be met with a Russian response, an appropriate response, but without a doubt, an effective response, and quite rightly so as well. Russia has every right under international law to national security. The Americans don't respect that, and that is why the world today is becoming a more and more dangerous place, because of the American obsession with trying to enhance strengthen its global dominance at the expense of others, and namely the Russian Federation.
Okay, we'll leave it there at that point. But as always, Dr. Papadopoulos, we of course appreciate your insight. That was Marcus Papadopoulos, who was speaking to us live from London.